the Emmett Shockley Administration Building. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumney,
Present.
Mr. Roscoe,
Present.
Mrs. Cameron,
Present.
Mr. Crowe present.
Okay. With that, on to Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the symbol of perfect friendship of the United States.
Now entertain a motion for approval of agenda.
Mr. President, members of the board, we do have some changes to the agenda.
Okay,
Under action items A, number 9, the consideration of budget adjustment request. We are requesting to strike number 9 at this time.
number 9.
And also on item K, there is a typo. It states consideration and award for an RFP. However, it is presented in your packet and throughout the process as a bid for air filters. So I just request for those changes to be approved.
Did you say the first one again?
Item 9, under action item A.
Oh, okay,
Making that one complete.
Yes.
I see it, okay.
And the second one is one again.
Yeah, it's gonna be a bid rather than RFP.
This one.
Yes.
For the air filter.
All right. With those changes, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion.
A
A second.
motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
All right. On to public comment. Do we have any?
I don't know if we do.
No public comment. Okay, on to reports. Just presentation and attendance.
Mr. Wyman.
Mr. Wyman.
Mr. President, members of the board, thank you guys for inviting me to talk about attendance. It's an important issue and talk about some of the steps we've taken and kind of where we're at right now. So I did put one of these sheets that front and back some of the data from this past year. The first thing that you'll see is a 3-year trend data for chronic absenteeism by school. Here in a moment, I'll talk about some of the trends for some of this. I do want to note though, that the numbers here will look slightly different than if you were to look it up on the NM Vista website for the school report cards. As we did some digging in and research into the calculations that they're utilizing, if a kid is enrolled in one of our schools for one day, is present in our school for that one day, then leaves and attends another school in New Mexico, and is chronic absent in that kid now counts against our school in Deming, which is not what the law says and is not the way that they originally had said they calculated it. But once we found that mistake, they said they were just gonna change the way that they wrote, the way they were gonna calculate that. So it will be slightly different if you look online. Below that, you'll see chronic absenteeism percentage by grade levels, which has some interesting trends as well across the district. And then on the backside, we started tracking in December how many home visits we completed this year. So that's on the back piece of that. So some trends that we see is that kinder has the highest elementary or chronic absenteeism in elementary. It trends lower each of the following years until they hit middle school, when you'll see that trend jumps up and kind of stays higher through high school. A positive trend, all but one of our elementary schools saw a significant decrease this past year in chronic absenteeism. And then on the flip side, unfortunately, all but one of our secondary schools saw slight increases to the chronic absenteeism. So overall, we did lower a little bit, but it was not quite what we wanted.
What do you consider significant decrease?
So if you look at, for instance, Columbus dropped 12% for their chronic absenteeism in 1 year. And 2 years ago, actually, over 2 years, they've dropped 30%. So it's trending in the right direction at our elementaries. We have some more work to do in our secondaries, and I think we have some things in place for next year and the future to be able to do that. So
What do we do to keep them coming? What do we do? What are we doing?
so that's the next thing I'm going to talk to you guys about. So this year, we focused on coming together and having more accountability across the district. And so we had bi-weekly PLCs with the student success team. And we really focused on implementing some systems and some processes that were clear and based on data as we move through the year. So when a child would hit certain percentages, we were trying particular interventions that are prescribed in the law and then in board policy as well. So we were going through that this year. We identified the need to increase our home visits, which we did start to do quite a few more home visits this year. And like I said, we don't have the historical data, but we started calculating that in about December, the beginning of December, and we had about over 400 through the end of the year. And then once we've done several interventions and it's still not working, the state law says that we shall refer those kids to the JPO. And so we, last year as a district, only referred 7 kids. This year we referred over 150. And so those meetings were productive. I know in the past there's been some difficulty working with JPO. Throughout this year, we really developed a positive relationship working with them, sat down, both of us trying to discuss how we can improve those things through counseling, through some supports for the students, the families. So we work closely with them this year. And then for next year, we're gonna have to attack some things a little bit different, right? We want to shift a little bit. One of the things we're doing is shifting to a district-based model focused on at-risk populations and attendance, which would allow us to increase the accountability and streamline those processes and expectations. That way because if you look at the schools, you're seeing different results, right? And if you look at the backside, for instance, you'll see that there are different home visits, number of home visits by school too. And so one of the things we need to do is we need to be making sure that all the kids in the district that are at those thresholds and those percents where they need the home visit, that they're getting those interventions. And not just home visits, but all those other interventions.
So once you have a home visit, does it improve them coming to school and stuff or not really?
I would say some kids, yes, some kids, no. The hard part about the law is that it says we have to do these certain things and we're doing them. But after we refer them to JPO, there's really not any teeth in the current law. And so we do our part and the accountability is really on the school district.
So out of that
not so much
100,
on the parents.
so out of that 150 kids that you referred to JPO, how many of those got back on track and were back in
I would say
school?
about half, and I'd say more so in the elementary. I think we were more successful. But really, on our end, when we're in those JPO meetings, it's from a supportive perspective. How do we help your child? How do we help you get your son or daughter to school? JPO is a little bit more on the punitive side, but we come together, we're in those meetings with them and we're trying to support those kids and get it back. But I'd say about 50%, you see some positive trends from that. At one point this year.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but with JPO, there's not any more punitive. So what are they doing with them?
Right, so they're doing something, and so their hands are tied too to a point, because there's no legal, it's.
Yeah. There's no
Beyond
teeth.
that, there's no teeth, right? And so, but they're supplying counseling as well, family counseling, parenting classes. They'll allow things like juvenile courts, those teen court, different things. They have some programs that they're really trying, and I can tell you that they're doing their best under the kind of the current law in New Mexico. And I know that there was a proposal, Charles and I were actually talking about it again earlier today, about changing the law, and I hope that comes back up at this next session, and that's something I think we should advocate for.
And what is that law gonna consist of?
You want to speak to that? Do you need it?
Sure. Mr. President, members of the board, so Representative Terrazas, our friend from Grant County, proposed a bill adding teeth to the law this year where parents would be held responsible in court for their students missing so much
If we
school.
would just get charged, I promise you they would come
Well, that's-
for what we have to get charged for.
And
And
that
so,
is what it works out to.
right, and so what Mr. Wyman and myself were talking about is I'm gonna reach out to Representative Terrazas and see if we can get him at the table with our liaisons and attendance team. So he can hear stories of the people that are actually handling these situations and hopefully propose the bill again.
The law was changed, because when I went to school, there was teeth, wasn't there? What happened? It
Yes.
got changed?
In 2019, so it's like a pendulum, right? And it was up here where there's some more accountability. And in 2019, there was a group of advocates that really went and kind of addressed legislatures, and they really pushed them to not have any kind of punishment consequences. And so the only people that are really truly held accountable are the schools and the districts at this point, unfortunately. So we're taking the steps we can, and I can tell you we're working hard to get our kids back in school. And at several parts throughout the year, because that percent for chronic absenteeism ebbs and flows and changes throughout the year. And at one point, we were significantly higher than where we ended. And so I do believe it's working. And I believe it's going to get better and better. But then obviously the pandemic, I think a lot of parents will even say in meetings, so, my kid was able to be successful when they were at home during the pandemic. I don't know why they needed to go to school now. I've heard kids tell me that in these meetings as well throughout this year. So I'm hoping that some of the things we're adjusting for next year will be beneficial. We're streamlining some of the processes so that we have some people that are constantly just looking at the data and identifying who these kids are throughout the district. Yesterday, we kind of compared it to like a dispatch, right? This person's going to be kind of sending out these other support pieces that we have throughout the district to say, hey, someone needs to go work with this student, with this child, check in on this student. We need to do a home visit for this child. This child needs a JPO referral, et cetera, depending on those different metrics that we're tracking throughout the year. So.
And so once you get those kids back that are chronic, does it stop there?
Depends.
Because obviously there's probably underlying issues for the
Yeah.
absenteeism. It's not just not gonna go to school today,
Yeah.
but do we put them back in the mix? And then how does that influence the overall mix from the 40,000 foot view? And how does that help the district? How does that?
So every situation is unique, right? So one of the things that we try to do early on when we're interviewing with these kids is identify what are the difficulties, what are the barriers to getting this kid to school. And I can even point to, Patty and I, Mr. Viso and I went out on a drive for about 45 minutes, kind of out to the sticks to find a kid's house and identify, is there a better way that we can support this kid with transportation? I can tell you, I went to the house that they don't have meaningful transportation to get the child to school. The bus route was a little bit far away. We as a district were able to make those adjustments. There's some children where there's some social emotional issues. We're able to kind of get them connected with different counseling services. Obviously, that depends on the parent agreeing and supporting that. But there are a lot of students that have different barriers. Worked a lot this year with Mr. Chavez, and actually Mr. Chavez and I will be working closer together with this project next year because we're going to be working with all at-risk children and students. But with migrant and McKinney students this year, we would get connected if there was a student needing clothing, needing shoes, backpacks, those kind of things. So we try to identify what are the barriers and how do we as a district support those barriers.
Is there a component in there for the parents of these kids to educate them?
There are some resources that we can refer them to, and JPO refers them to as well. But again, that's depending.
Because there's the education component, but the issue that I see with it too is that we almost do too much in the respect that, hey, we're gonna keep your kid from 7 till 6.
Sure.
We're gonna feed them 3 times a day.
Sure.
And so the parents are like, what do I need to do? I think that we have to find a way to be able to incorporate those parents back in there and have the parents be the parents to be able to get them back in the thing where they're taking it upon themselves. Hey, the bus is a little too far. I need to go to the school, find out, hey, my kid has to walk a couple of miles. Can we do something else? Or, hey, my kid doesn't have transportation. Or, hey, I'd like to see more of that, where we put some of that responsibility on the parents for them being the parents.
I agree.
Because we're slowly gravitating towards a situation where
We're doing everything.
we're doing everything.
Yeah.
Drop my kid off at 7:30, I pick them up at 6.
Don't have to feed them, they get fed, everything.
Each have 3 meals a day. They need clothes, and don't get me wrong, I understand the need for clothes and I understand the need for shoes. I grew up, I didn't have very much either. But the times of your parents having to work an extra couple hours, and the times that your parents have to work an extra shift to provide for you, those days are gone.
I hear you.
And it's we do so much, and there's more money to do this and that, but at what point do we incorporate the parents into the whole mix? Because even when the schools call the parents, hey, your son misbehaving, that's your problem. He's at your school, it's not mine. That's the attitude that we're developing because we're doing so much.
And we do get some of that, right? I mean, we do transparently, we get some parents that respond that way, but a lot of our parents, they want their kids in school, I think, as well. In my experience, we do engage the parent the whole way through this process. So there's a contract that they're placed on, so the parent comes in and meets with the school. But then there are some parents that are not compliant and don't show up. But I would say that's not the majority. I think the majority of our parents want their kids in school as well. But I do understand your point as well.
Mr. Wyman, I think your job is very important because if you don't get these kids to school or get them here, we're not gonna get any. It's really sad that that's how we get paid. And so if you don't do your job and realistically, that one meeting that we had here, we're losing however many kids, 130, 140, whatever it is. That's money that's going out of the district because they don't want, they're either taking homeschooling or they don't want to come to school. And that's a crucial situation. We're not up in the 5,000s like we used to be. We're below that, I guess, I'm assuming. So we got to get on the ball and focus on getting them kids to school so that we can make sure that everybody else doesn't get affected, because then people's jobs are in the balance, you know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah. And additionally to that, you know, we're not gonna get proficiency rates and we don't get kids in school, right? We're not gonna be able to provide the instruction that we need when they're not here. So it adds a lot of layers of difficulty to the district, to the teachers. You know, if you have a student who's chronically absent and you're trying to catch that kid up constantly while you're also trying to move forward with your other students, it is a complicated dynamic. But I think next year we have a really solid plan. I'm excited to see what we do. But you are absolutely correct. It's crucial that we get these kids in school. So I'm excited to take on that next year. Any other questions?
I was curious to know, you might have said this already, and I'm sorry if I didn't agree, but what defines chronic absenteeism?
It's a perfect question. So chronic absenteeism is 10%. We don't refer to JPO until 20%. So 10% of a school year, so this year was 180 days, so we had 18 days that a student could miss, and on that 18th day, they'd be considered chronically absent for the year. Obviously, again, the number of days changes over time, so that number can kind of come up and down.
so that's when you guys start
We
looking.
start at 5%.
Okay,
So at 5%. So again, after 10 days, we start looking at those percentages. And so those numbers change every day depending on if the kid shows up that day or not. But we try to start intervening with those kids at 5%. And then the chronic absence stuff starts at 10. And then we have some things that we were just talking about all this, that we start to do addition to that at 15%, because we don't want them to get to 20%. And then at 20%, again, the losses that we shall refer them to JPO. So that's kind of that step. Now, we don't just, hey, we refer to JPO, we're done now. We stay engaged in that conversation, engaged in those meetings, and engaged in that process for that child to get back to school. So
Maybe, I know time-wise doesn't always allow it. Maybe we should start on the first day calling and.
What we
whether
do, so if we have students that no show on that first day, that don't show up, that we were anticipating should show up, we do begin as a district calling them immediately. But as far as identifying kids, the law says that after 10 days of enrollment, 10% or more is
Okay.
chronic absenteeism. And that's a federal definition.
Mhm.
So they have to be there at least 10 days first?
Yes, but just to remind you guys, as I said earlier, the state was calculating it incorrectly. And so actually, I worked with Ms. Crow as well, and we looked at that, and we identified, we clarified that was not our mistake. And so the state didn't acknowledge it at first. They looked at it for about a week. They came back, they said, you're right, but we're just gonna change it to where if the kid's enrolled in your district one day, doesn't matter if they're present or not, as long as they're 10 days in the state, that kid will come against us. Or for us, but more often than not, if the kid's enrolled 1-2 days, it's probably not gonna be positive for us.
Questions?
There's a difference between enrolled and being in present, right?
Yes, enrolled is if they're enrolled, that day counts. They don't have to be here necessarily, but if they're enrolled, those days count.
Does this information include kids that may have just dropped out?
It depends. So it includes all kids that were enrolled for at least 10 days during the school year. So some of these kids weren't with us at the end of the year, but the way that the state, and again, that federal definition is, as long as they were enrolled at least 10 days during the school year. Any other questions?
Do we have a state? I don't, it's not record, but a state somewhere like this, showing the different schools as far as attendance.
So if you go to nmvistas.org.
NM what?
nmvistas,
Vista?
vistas.org. It does have all the metrics for the district and each school. You can break it down by each school.
Thank you.
And attendance is on there, so. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
On to NEA Deming.
President, board members, sorry, you think that my voice not being in school. Good evening, my name is Cindy Berger, and I have a very short since school is out, just we're gonna have new elections with new officers coming up in August when we return, and currently we have a lot of, or several of our members attending different conferences. It's pretty short, school's out.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, with that, on to consent agenda.
Mr. President, I'd recommend approval of the consent agenda as written.
I have a second.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take a roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
On to action items. Action item A, under 8A.
Mr. President, members of the board, we have Ms. Doyle here to present one budget adjustment request.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. We do have before you one budget adjustment. This is a Title I budget adjustment, kind of an end of year adjustment, small adjustments to cover salary line items. That's it.
Looking for words to say.
Oh, there's more.
Any questions, comments? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move. That we approve the the budgets. Or is that the one I'm saying right on SY 24? Or no, that's, are we on title?
Action item A.
8A.
I thought so,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. For 8A, I move approval of the budget adjustment request.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take a roll, please?
Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron.
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
All right, on to item 8B. Consideration and approval of budgets for SY 24-25.
Mr. President, members of the board, before you, you do have a couple of different budgets. Unfortunately, this is not going to be the end of them. We are still awaiting some allocation specifically for our DFE. So we are fingers crossed that that will be at the next board meeting on the 27th. You'll be able to approve that. There's a couple of other ones also, but just know that this is the budget adjustments that you have before you this evening. The first one is pupil transportation. That's our to and from transportation. You can see in there specifically, I just wanted to point out, and I know that this will also be addressed this evening in the transportation contracts, but we will be paying the transportation contract. There's $2,062,445.84 for services and rental fees, which is just a pass through from PED through us. We just turn around and pay it to our contractors of $148.93. So just so you know, when you do approve the contracts, that this does match what is in the contracts for both of our bus plans.
Would you say those numbers again?
Yes, ma'am. $2,062,445.84 for services. And rental fees is $140,893.
Thank you.
Then the next budget that we have is McKinney-Vento. As presented to you, it was 98,000. However, I did receive a phone call this about 3:30 or 4 this afternoon, where they told me that they are reducing it to 23,659. I do believe that later in the year, we will give that additional money. It's just carryover and we're not budgeting for that right now.
Went from 98 to 23. Wow. Just with the phone call. Wow.
So we do have some salary paid out of there. We haven't had a chance to kind of figure out where we're going to pay for that, given the timeframe. I imagine that Mr. Chavez is here, that the bulk of that will then shift to Title I. That the plans are current. And that is a little bit different than it was presented to you, but unfortunately I didn't a chance to rework it.
Is that something that's happened across the state, or is it just something that happened with us, or is it something that?
I want to say it's happened across the state because they also sent some additional documentation that they wanted by the end of today, after sending the email at 3:30. And it was sent across the state, so I'm going to assume, but I haven't heard for sure.
And no reason, just reduce it. And
Did you know? of
we'll talk to you later.
I was gonna present the application, but what happened is on the application itself, we were asked to budget for 75,000 was the max, so we shot for the moon, and the moon was on that board. So now we just need to readjust the budget. We did for the 23-24 fiscal, we did get 24,000 for McKinney Vento for our homeless population. And next year we'll be receiving 20. So it's about the same that we got this year, but we were asked to allocate a little more. It's just that we're only given a smaller amount, so.
And that 23,000 is based on the number of kids that qualify for that program, or how's that factor?
Yes, it is, I think Albuquerque gets maybe 30, maybe 40. Albuquerque, so that's, of course, the largest district. So us getting 23 is about right. I'm hoping, we'll see the allocation when we see the table. But it is comparable to what we received last year. So we were just asked to plan, so we budgeted and we were able to sell them and to provide other supports that we had never planned for before. So now tomorrow morning, I'll be scanning that back and sending that information to PD first thing in the morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for that additional context. So then the next one that you have is our Title II, Principal, Teacher and Principal Training and Recruiting. This is primarily some salaries as well as additional compensation. Then we have our, let me make sure I'm doing this in the right order, rural and low income schools. What we typically budget out of here and did this year as well as our hard to staff stipend. So it's going to be our bilingual and special education stipends for those teachers, and it's some professional development. For our immigrant funding, which is Fund 24163, if you're following by fund, the 150,000. Also, you can see primarily for salaries, although there is 24,000 for supplies and materials as well. Carl Perkins redistribution. There are some laptops, Surface Pros, I believe, that they're planning to purchase with those funds. Then for our Title IV, which is 24189, it is almost all salary this year. That is different than in the past. In the past, we have been able to provide professional development and things like that, but this year we have done almost exclusively salary out of Title IV. The next two funds, 24350 and 355, which are our carryover. They're real small amounts. One is 2,200 and one is 3,200, both for our McKinney Vento children, and that is all in salaries.
If, may I ask a question?
Yes.
If you haven't used all the money, how much percentage are we allowed to carry over?
15.
50?
1 5.
Oh, 15, okay. Thank you.
You can't hide it, huh? You're in accounting, you can't hide it.
No, sorry.
Just asking.
Asking for a friend.
For a friend.
Yeah.
That way they don't take that much.
Then we do have our out of school time. This is 215,000. This is where we pay for our after school program this year. And I will be presenting some budget items next board meeting that we did just get allocations for. So we're doing some braided funding for our after school program. There's going to be some high dosage tutoring as well as this funding. So that will be forthcoming at the next board meeting, but for purposes of this, I'm asking for approval for the 215,000 for our out of school time funding. And then lastly, our community schools grant for 75,000. There's a portion of the coordinator and then some professional development. Portion of the coordinator's salary.
Any questions? Comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the budget for school year 24-25 as presented by Ms. Doyle.
I'll second that.
Motion in a second. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco.
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes. Thank you so much, and I'm just playing around. I know we can't hide it.
I figured as much.
We're gonna have it in the paper tomorrow.
That on to C, consideration and approval of fleet contract. SY 24-25 with M&T Buses Incorporated. Mr. Rizzo.
Yes, good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. So before you is the fleet service contract between Denton Public Schools and M&T Buses for 24-25 school year. We have gone through the formal negotiation process. I survived my first round. And I do want to take this time to thank both M&T Buses and Haynes Buses alongside our district personnel that assisted with the process. We didn't receive the transportation allocation until May 28th. And then we quickly had to provide drafts for the contracts to PED by June 14th. So that left us with less than 2 weeks to get everything in place. Thankfully, we met our deadline and we were able to complete the negotiation process within 2 days. And so, like I mentioned, district personnel, including our superintendent, were at the table alongside our contractors to finalize these contracts. So at this time, we would like to request your approval of the fleet service contract with M&T in order to be able to move forward with transportation services for the upcoming year. The full contract amount for M&T buses is $1,343,863.36.
But how many? 74?
The total is $1,343,863.36. That does include rental fees as well. And now it's down before you.
I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Sanchez, do you have anything? No? Put you on the spot.
I move that we approve the fleet contract that's for SY 24-25 with M&T Buses Incorporated. Do I need to read the amount?
No.
With 1,300,000? No.
I'll
Okay,
second that.
Motion in a second. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
yes.
Mr. Orozco.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
Okay, thank you. On to D. Mr. Rizzo again.
Okay, so before you have the fleet service contract between Denton Public Schools and Haynes Buses. This next item is exactly same terms and conditions of this contract as in M&T's contracts, with the exception of the amounts. They're very specific to Haynes's routes, their buses, and their mileage. Their total contract amount is $879,141.34. Again, that does include rental fees as well.
Questions? Comments? I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the contract. Fleet contract SY 24-25 with Haynes Buses Incorporated in the amount of $879,141.34.
Second.
I'll second.
Motion in a second. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
On to E, consideration and approval of immigrant grant for SY 24-25. Mr. Chavez.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. Before you have our immigrant grant for the 24-25 school year. This year, the initial grant was for $50,000 with a carryover amount of about $100,000. So, you know, after planning with Mrs. Gordon and our team, we found that probably the best way to utilize this money is to get some help with this population. Our district has approximately 280 to 290 immigrant students that were born in another country within the last and have been in our district within the last 3 years. These individuals are students, they would be focused on our kiddos who were not born, not solely from Mexico, but we're looking more towards of our populations that are speaking Arabic languages. We had a couple of young ladies that came from Jordan that had a really hard time transitioning into the culture. And just so they can have a constant support, especially at the secondary level, it seems like, you know, because we're dealing with credits and we're dealing with such a higher level of need for the kiddos in that area that we decided that's going to be the best focus for the funding this year. We're only one of 2 districts also, so we have one of the highest populations. Roswell and Deming are the only 2 districts in the state that receive this grant.
Roswell,
Roswell and
interesting.
I guess all the aliens, I don't. No fun.
Let's strike that.
All right, so
UFO aliens. I'm not that smart.
I needed that.
questions, comments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the integrate grant for school year 24-25.
I have a second.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Crowe, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes,
Mr. Roscoe.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
Okay. On to item F, consideration and approval of McKinney grant for SY 24-25.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Let's see how I mess this one up, but luckily Mrs. Doyle already kind of did a little intro with the McKinney grant. There will be some changes as you heard with the fiscal piece, us having that little bit of a reduction. We will have to alter those, but the McKinney grant was about.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Armando?
absolutely.
What's, they just decided that one day that this is what they want to do and that's it, huh?
I don't know yet, because we did get that phone call later, so I'm gonna call Dana when we go on to the state person. And ask, we did call before, and what was told to us was, let's go ahead and ask for them, if you guys feel like you can utilize that 75,000, apply for it, you know, budget it, and we'll see, hopefully you guys will get more. And then like, no, why did you guys budget for so much? It's like, okay, so we just have to know, but it is in the grant. You can see it does say there to plan for $75,000. It's actually on the grant itself. And you can see it's a very lengthy, and they said that PED tried to make it more streamlined, but this was the most difficult grant of the season. I think that it took much more planning, than we get in our district 23,000. The district does invest much more money into McKinney other than the 23. And we are talking about our equity social worker that really focused on the population, and also the rest of the team that's about to start or embark on a new journey to that's going to help that population as well. And we're looking at close to between, depending on the year, from 280 to about 330 that are considered homeless or doubled up or in the hotels and such on high. A lot of them reside in the area as well.
Questions, comments?
do you keep track of the number that lives like along in the hotels and?
We can pull that data. It's more of a manual. We'd have to go by address and see and pull them that way. We do our best to try to get them more stable as much as we can provide. We try, of course, our job is to focus on the educational piece, to make sure they are in school, that their grades are up to par, and what do they need? What little gaps are they missing? What barriers are in place to ensure that they have what they need? Also, big proponent of one thing that we're really pushing, and it is law, is that, you know, they have certain rules and laws that protect them to enroll immediately. And it does mean that our people, our direct student support services, so there's 4 of them, will ensure that they can enroll immediately without all the paperwork in place. But it's our job to do that running and to make sure we can get birth certificates and immunization and everything in place. So the schools aren't waiting, on that paperwork as well. And we transport them to get the immunizations if needed, whatever the case may be for this general, just for this population. So it's very crucial.
Thank you.
Other questions? No, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the McKinney grant for SY 24-25.
Have a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe.
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
And with that, on to item G, consideration and approval of title
One more turn.
grant for SY 24-25.
From the first one. Our Title IV grant, as Mrs. Doyle also mentioned earlier, it will be focused more on providing equitable, well, in this case, now it's gonna be staff that are hired. I think we have maybe 6 FTEs coming out of Title IV or portions of them. So a sliver of this one and a sliver of that one, and then we have a few that the entire salary is coming out of the grant. Community schools, I think we're at 36% of the salary is coming out of the grant. We have 2 people from our team, Andrew, that are I think an intake person that's gonna work with families and just people around the district that are focused on different areas to fill those areas.
Questions? Entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve Title IV grant for school year 24-25.
Have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron.
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
With that, on to item H, consideration and approval of handbook of special education procedures as provided by Walsh Gallegos for SY 24-25. Mr. Science.
Board President Roscoe, members of the board, I stand before you for approval of the 24-25 handbook that was vetted out by Walsh and Gallegos. They take on the new changes to the laws and regulations, and then they support it by putting it into our procedures for the Deming Public Schools. And so before you, I had a table of changes, and then where the changes happen in the third column is where it's embedded in our procedures. So I stand for any questions.
Any questions?
Is the handbook available on the website for the district?
We haven't put it on there, but we're looking at hopefully getting it on there so that everybody can see it. We do a manual that is something that we take for our own staff, and we get that out to everybody, but we're looking at putting this on there so that everybody's able to look at it and become more familiar with what the regulations are for SPED or ESS, exceptional student services.
Yeah. No, I'll entertain a motion.
I move consideration and approval of the, excuse me, special education procedures as provided by Walsh Gallegos for SY 24-25.
I have a second.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Kroll, can you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
With that, on to item I, consideration and award for RFP 2406, speech language therapy. Mr. Sines.
So we had to go out to for an RFP for speech and language, which the contract was up after 3 years. And so we had 9 people to go ahead and endorse and try to get the award. But we came up with 4 of them. And we would like to go ahead and award the RFP number 2406 speech and language therapy to Sonrisa Therapies, CR Focus, Corporation Unlimited Teletherapy, LLC, and the Sea Valley Therapy Service.
Any questions on that? Comments? If none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve the award for RFP 24-06 for speech language therapy.
And have a second.
Second,
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take a vote?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe?
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron?
yes,
Mr. Crowe, yes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Science. On to item J, consideration and award for RFP 2407 physical therapy. Mr. Science again.
And the physical therapy contract was up, and so we did go out again for bid. We had three that went ahead and endorsed to see if they could get the award. But we'd like to go ahead and ask for your approval for RFP number 2407 physical therapy to be awarded to Man in Motion.
what is it?
Man in Motion.
Questions? Entertain a motion.
I move that we award for RFP 2407 physical therapy.
Good. Have a second.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take a vote, please?
Sir, Mrs. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe?
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron?
Yes,
Mr. Crowe, yes.
All right. And on to, thank you, Mr. Science. On to item K, consideration and award for bid. I'm sorry, consideration for bid of RFP 2408.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. What you have before you is a bid for air filters for the district. Just a little bit of the process. This covers over 900 air units in the district that get changed 3 to 6 times a year. When I say 3 to 6, Deming Intermediate gets changed every other month because we have a huge dust problem out there. And the rest of the schools get changed about every 4 months. So that's a tremendous amount of air filters. So as it was presented to get a year's worth in stockpile right now while we had our money, the conversation was, well, while we have it, let's get 2 years. And so what you see before you is 2 years worth of filters that's coming from Wise Out Air Filter. We've been using them since COVID because they were, during COVID, their bid prices were almost 20,000 cheaper than everybody else.
Wow.
For 1 year. And when we went out to bid, their prices were about 4,000 cheaper for 1 year than everybody else. And then when we went out to this bid, they actually came in cheaper than that. So they saved us about 6,000 more by going 2 years. So any questions? I'll stand for any questions at this point.
he says for 2 years.
It'll be for 2 years worth of filters. Now, not complete, there's probably gonna be another $3,000-4,000 of filters because we're undergoing a lot of unit changes right now. And we don't know what sizes those units will be taking until they're installed.
Questions? None, I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the RFP 2408 for the air filters.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Kroll, can you take roll, please?
Mrs. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe?
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron?
Yes,
Mr. Crowe, yes.
Thank you. On to item L. Consideration and approval of lease agreement addendum with Deming Cesar Chavez Charter High School for at school year 24-25.
Mr. President, members of the board, we are joined by Mr. Nunez, whose voice you'll hear come out of the owl. We are requesting approval of the lease agreement addendum for the charter school. All it does is extend the current terms of which they've been operating under since their start in We stand for any questions. Mr. Nunez, if you can hear us, do you have anything to add?
No, Mr. Turner, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. But one of the main comments that Mr. Turner had mentioned is we're probably gonna have to redo this contract, maybe after this. My understanding, I learned today from Mr. Turner that this lease agreement has been there in existence since 2008. So I think it's time that we upgrade this. So, but in the meantime, this will go on for this year, and I think for next school year we should update it to the more modern. There's some vocabulary in there that doesn't exist anymore. So we do ask that you approve of this lease agreement, and I stand for questions, Mr. Attorney.
Questions? Entertain a motion.
Also move approval of the lease agreement addendum with Deming Cesar Chavez Charter High School for school year 24-25.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Cole, can you take a roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco.
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
That passes. Thank you, Mr. Nunez.
We still have another.
Yes, sir, Mr.
And
Chairman.
on to item M, consideration and approval of memorandum of understanding with Deming Cesar Chavez Charter High School for nutrition services for SY 24-25.
Mr. President, members of the board, this is a annual memorandum of understanding that we have with Charter. It allows for our nutrition services to provide meals to the students out at Charter. The terms have not changed. The only thing would be the school year. Mr. Nunez, you have anything to add?
No, other than we're very pleased with the services. We want to continue this relationship.
Questions on the board side? If none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the memorandum of understanding with Deming Cesar Chavez Charter High School for nutrition services for school year 24-25.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Mr. Kroll, can you take roll, please?
Sir, Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco.
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
All right. With that, on to item N. Consideration and approval of memorandum of understanding with Deming Cesar Chavez Charter High School for exceptional student services for SY 24-25.
Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Sines and myself worked on this MOU to make sure that everything seemed okay with compliance and all the new regulations. Mr. Sines did look it over before we sent it over to the charter school for their approval. But other than that, Mr. Sines, you have anything to add? Okay, Mr. Nunez?
No, again, this is another good relationship we have with Deming Public Schools. We're fortunate to have a good SPED department, and we're lucky that Mr. Science does train our facilitator on a monthly basis. So we stand for questions.
Questions on the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move for approval of memorandum of understanding with Deming Cesar Chavez Charter High School for exceptional student services for SY 24-25.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Mr. Kroll, can you take roll, please?
Yes, Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron.
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
Okay, and with that, we're on to item O, consideration and approval of annual meetings resolution for SY 24-25. Mr. Turner?
Mr. President, members of the board, the annual meetings resolution is something we do every year. It serves as our legal notice for our regular meetings. This year, we are proposing for approval that we move the start time to 5:30. The regular meetings would still be every third Thursday of the month. And we have also built in a public, basically a public input session the first Thursday of every month. Now, that wouldn't be a regular meeting, so that would just be for the public to be able to come in and provide the district feedback and open those lines of communication. The annual meetings resolution is also used for our audits with finance. And it just helps cover us for a lot of our legal aspects. And I stand for questions.
Mr. Turner, does that mean that the board would, people would come in, the board and present to the board?
It could be, students, we could recognize our student groups as we often bring them in. We can bring in schools to give presentations, departments to give, updates and things like
So
that.
kind of separate the two.
Yes.
Thank you.
Questions, comments? I'll entertain a motion.
I move for approval of the annual meetings resolution for SY 24-25.
Do I have a second?
Second,
Motion and a second. Mr. Kroll, can you take a roll, please?
Mrs. Crumley,
yes.
Mr. Orozco,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes,
Mr. Crow, no.
On to item P, consideration and approval of Second Amendment Fleet Service Contract to Haynes Buses Inc. for SY 23-24. Ms. Treviso,
Mr. President, members of the board, before you is the Second Amendment for Fleet Service Contract for Mr. Haynes, for Haynes buses for this current school year, 23-24. If you recall, back in June of last year, the school board approved the bus lease agreement for bus 68 that went through the attrition process to Haynes buses. So bus 68 is the special education bus in Columbus. Mr. Haynes had placed an order for his own bus, and the agreement was that we would lease our bus for 10 cents per mile until his bus came in. Unfortunately, due to delays in manufacturing, mainly production of buses, circumstances beyond our control or his control, Mr. Haynes was never really able to receive his bus last school year. And so the updated estimated build date now given to Mr. Haynes is October 2024 with a delivery date of November, late November or early December 2024. And so therefore, please note that I will have to come back to the board to renew the lease agreement for bus 68 for the next school year. And also later do an amendment to the contracts that you just approved for the next school year. So it does become a little bit of a complicated process, but again, like I mentioned, this really is circumstances beyond our control or even his control. And so for now, I come before you to request approval of a second amended fleet service contract for this current school year, 23-24 that just passed. He did run bus 68 in Columbus the entire school year from August to May. And so we're basically just paying him back for operation, maintenance, fuel, salary, and benefits. Today's amendment also includes deducting the lease agreement amount of 10 cents per mile for our bus. And so the amended amount today for you to approve is $28,024.19. And with that, now I stand for any questions.
questions?
now this is additional, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Just, I thought it was, but I wanted to make sure. I'll move approval of the Second Amendment Fleet Contract, Service Contract with Haynes Buses Incorporated for SY 23-24.
Do I have a second?
I'll second,
Motion and a second. Mr. Kroll, can you take a roll, please?
Yes, Mrs. Crumley,
yes.
Mr. Orozco,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes,
Mr. Crow, yes.
And with that, those action items on to superintendent's office report.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, under the superintendent's office report, we do have Ms. Doyle to present a couple of different options for crowdfunding procedures, and we just would like some feedback.
Mr. President, members of the board, this is in the packet, correct?
Yes.
So in your packet, there are really two options for crowdfunding. This is something that has come up more and more, and so I did work with our auditors to try and get some feedback from them and wanted some feedback from you guys on which direction you wanted us to go. So really, the options are that if a teacher goes to use, say, Donors Choose, well, not Donors Choose, any type of crowdfunding, there's a process that they will need to follow. And it needs to be approved, and they follow the same fundraiser procedures that any of our others would use. What we're finding was that there were individuals that were going out and soliciting, say, supplies, but we had plenty of money here at the district where we could provide those supplies. And so we want that approval to be through the principal, so that if they see, like, you're requesting markers, well, we can buy markers for you. You don't need to go out and solicit that. So that is one option where they could go out onto any of those different websites and solicit that. If they are using, you know, I am a teacher at Deming Public Schools. Now, if they go out and they say, I am Leslie Doyle, you know, we can't really do much there. But if they use Deming Public Schools or their position within the district, then we do have some control. So that is option one. There is also an option where all of it does have to be done through the school. So if using the same scenario, there's actually a link that will go out from from Deming Public Schools where all the money goes to our account. Now, one of the things I did not mention early on in this first one was that if a teacher or anybody does go out, that they cannot collect the money. The check would need to come to us, to Deming Public Schools, so that we could then deposit the money and account for it. Whereas what is currently happening is, as individuals, they are collecting that money and it is going into their bank account, and then they are using it as, you know, to purchase the goods from their own funds that they collected. So we're trying to figure out a way to still provide this if necessary, but I do think that the approval process through the principal will allow us to say, hold on, maybe you don't need to do this, rather let us help you buy these things. And so I'm looking for some guidance on which option you guys would like me to.
Can I ask a question? So what if a person does that and they just say, I'm a teacher, that's it, and I need help? Does that affect them or us or anything like that? They didn't mention the school, but they just said that they're a teacher.
I mean, I think if they live in Deming, we could make some inferences that they do. I don't know how specific you guys would.
No, I'm just
need
curious
to
about
be.
that.
I do think it's fair to say that if they live in Deming and they're a teacher, that they work for Deming Public Schools, but I mean, that's the kind of guidance that I'm looking for you guys to kind of wrangle this a little bit.
I kind of like going through the principles in the respect, because we're a small community, and when schools start up, you get hit, you can't go almost anywhere, and you're gonna get hit with, buy a t-shirt from me, buy this from me, buy that from me. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I mean, everybody's asking for donations for something. And if we can regulate some of that, because we're not only dependent on taxpayers to be able to fund us for the year, we're also dependent on those same taxpayers to help buy a shirt, here's another $20, you know. And I think that if we can kind of mitigate some of that with, like, the principal saying, you want markers? No, here's some markers. We can do that. I think that we may be able to take a little bit of a burden off of the same folks that we're asking for those, to buy those shirts and things like that, because, you know, hey, you don't need markers. The schools have them. We have this, we have that. I think that's a better idea than just kind of leaving it open to, you know, more of a free for all.
So in both cases, we can do that. In both cases, we could involve the principal. I guess the biggest distinction is, do we want to allow them to go to any website they would like, or do we want to create a website that actually I would work with Ms. Kroll to do, and they could, you know, still have the link, and they could still advertise it on social media as appropriate or whatever, but it is unique to Deming Public Schools, where the others, like GoFundMe or whatever, are kind of, you know, out there a little more. And so those, I guess, would be the two biggest distinctions between the two. We would, I have the policy where the principal would still have to approve it in either scenario. Because I do think that that is an important piece that we're missing. Because I do get a lot of feedback, well, hey, did you know, have you seen this GoFundMe, or have you seen this? And at this point, there's really nothing I can do because we've not really, you know, it's not been brought to you guys or something that I've really addressed at all.
What's the cleaner process for the audit in terms of the audit?
The auditor was actually fine either of those scenarios.
I think I like the link that what you mentioned about controlling it. Where we have complete control and stuff. I think that's a good idea. Does it happen a lot?
It happens enough.
Okay, I'm just curious. That's. 'cause
I mean,
I've noticed
I don't
it.
know, I don't see all of them, but you know that I get screenshots and texts, and have you seen this?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's nothing I can do.
I don't think I like, if we could control it with the link or whatever, I think that would be good. But anyways.
Is the idea that the link that you're talking about, if it was through the district, not through these other third-party random places, is that link only going to be used if there isn't money, or is that a link that's going to be used for teachers to ask for things?
So the difference would be that in this link, that the monies, like they would go in and they would put that credit card in, that would go directly to our bank account.
Like if people in the community or parents wanted to donate, is that what you're saying?
Well, yes.
But would the link also be attached to the whatever else they use or whatever? Would that be possible, or
You mean like stuff?
like, yeah, like other, you know, whatever they go pay me or whatever it's called, or
No, that.
whatever.
No, that is something that would actually, as I understand it, that link is generated through Infinite Campus through the school store, so it is very specific to Deming. And then the link would be created where if they clicked on the link, then, you know, you would, similar to whatever you would see for GoFundMe, there's like a story and
No, I see.
a request. But the big difference there is that instead of us getting a check from, say, Donors Choose, or I keep using that, GoFundMe, where there is, you know, administrative fees, we don't know what we're actually going to get. This means that all of it goes directly to whatever the request is. And it goes into our bank, so the teacher would identify what it is that they wanted. We would be able to identify those funds and ensure that whatever the purpose of that request was, that's what those funds would go to.
Which, Mrs. Padron, principals, what's your guys' thoughts on that? I mean, you guys see it at the school sites and get bombarded with people wanting to do fundraising for.
And a lot of the teachers do use those websites to ask for things. And what happens is those websites also take a percentile of the money. So it's not just, so not only do they solicit that money from a website, but that website also takes a part of that money. But if we create our own one,
Then they have to pay that
have
extra.
to pay a certain percentile, and it'll be more monitored by the district than by a website that they have out there. And the principals will have a little bit more control of what they're asking for, because like they say, if they're asking for glue sticks, if they're asking for pencils, if they're asking for supplies, those are things that the district should be able to buy them. But if they want extra, like let's say they're doing what did we talk about? A project or something that I don't know how to explain, something that.
I think there was one like last year before last, when a teacher was asking for like chairs.
I was gonna say furniture.
Yeah, there was a furniture one.
Like a big carpet, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, and something that it's extra or something, maybe fun.
It's not the regular
Yeah.
thing that we have.
But the school can say, yes, some people ask for, what do you call bean bags? Well, we don't allow sometimes bean bags. Well, the principal has the autonomy to say, nope, we can't have that here. So it'll give a little bit of autonomy to the principals also to decide whether they want that in their schools or they can have that in their schools, where the other websites you can't.
So Deming doesn't allow beanbags?
No, well, I think it depends on the seating, what type of seating you have. So.
We won't get into
mean-
that. I'm sorry.
It's the insurance that doesn't allow them.
Okay,
So does the policy get written to where they use this exclusively, and if they do outside of that, they're in violation of policy? Is that how that would be written?
Yeah, because sometimes they buy it and then they want to get rid of that, so they get something a little bit more different color or more elegant, and so we're like, well, what do you want us to do with this furniture?
Mm.
So again, it's regulated,
Then we own it, then we control
Yeah,
it, the
so-
whole thing, that's.
Yes, it does say, somewhere in here
yes.
that it belongs to the district. It also says if it's technology, that the technology department does need to be involved, so we're not getting a bunch of things that they can't support or that there will be issues with there. And now all of this is happening completely outside of any control of anybody. The principal, technology, central office, no, nothing.
Yeah, I've been a part of a few of those conversations where like, show the principal, hey, did you know about this? Like, didn't know about this.
I have to.
So, yeah. Comments, any other comments? Thoughts?
So would it prevent them then also from going out and doing another fundraiser for?
Yeah, policy would be written to where they just have to be able to use this only, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So the policy actually refers to the procedures, and so this would be part of the procedure. And, so that's. Just know that this is part of the procedure piece and not necessarily directly in our policy. But as it is something that I'm adding to that procedure, I wanted to make sure that I got some feedback from you guys, which direction that we wanted to go. Did you have a preference? I really don't. The control person, the control freak in me is one of the one that we have a little bit more control over. Having said that, though, as we did discuss it in leadership, everybody else preferred the other one. So I can make either one work. I mean, really, I can. I just.
Sometimes you have to let go, don't you?
That's what they tell me.
Any other discussion on that? Anything else?
Well, would that have to come for us to approve it once?
Well, it would be a report, as I understand.
But we wouldn't have to vote on.
At a
it.
later time, it wouldn't come before us for a vote.
It would not come before you as a vote. It would come before you as like a change to procedure.
Okay,
So which one did
I was hearing the board preferred the link.
the link? Okay.
Link,
I don't have a preference, to be honest.
Mrs. Cameron,
no. Oh,
no
no.
preference?
Huh?
No preference? Do you prefer the link or no preference?
What are we paying other people when we can keep most of the proceeds, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's how I see it. but-
Yeah.
Okay, I will proceed accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, man. And to.
Is this something we'll need to vote on?
No,
I'm sorry.
We don't need to vote on this later.
No.
Oh, thank you.
in an SBA policy adoption rollout?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, next Thursday at noon, we will be having a special meeting to vote on the policy adoption provided from the School Boards Association. Now, it's gonna be a bumpy takeoff, if you will. Once we approve it, we'll notify the School Boards Association and they will build the policy portal, which once that's live, we'll have links on our website, and as rules or laws get changed, they'll be able to update them for us. And of course, we will get that notification. We'll go through our process. But it's just a lot cleaner in the way that we can edit and update our policies. The other thing is it will take them a little bit of time. They're a small team. So we will have the policies in my office. However, we will have like the drafts that we've been looking at the last few months available on the website, but with the disclaimer to contact the superintendent's office for the final policy. And then on top of that, to help our administrative team, we haven't figured out if it'll be weekly or every other week, but we will be releasing like a policy update newsletter similar to the one that I do during legislative session. Just so we can highlight key points and try to get the new information out there because it's something like 1,200 pages. I don't remember exactly what it was. So we're gonna have to, kind of the way we digested it bit by bit, we're gonna try to introduce our administrators to it bit by bit.
May I ask a question? Sure. We would still have to approve the policy,
That will happen on Thursday,
the special meeting, okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
On to announcements. Any board member requests for agenda items? No. There will be a special meeting June 27th, 2024 at 12 PM to consider approval of district budgets and possible adoption of new district policies as provided by NMSBA Policy Service. And with that, on to item 11. Entertain a motion to
No,
adjourn.
you didn't say next meeting.
That's a typo.
Okay. So, motion for adjourn,
Yes.
motion to adjourn.
And so moved.
Have a second.
second it.
Mr. Polk, can you take a roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mrs. Crumley,
Yes.
Mr. Orozco,
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, yes.
And with that,